Okay, so fantastic. So thanks ever so much for showing up today. As I said, we launched the book officially last week. So I say we had the help of Aliona, who unfortunately can't join us today because they've got a power outage in the Philippines. So hopefully I do justice to all the technical side and don't get too confused with what's going on. So thanks to those who are listening in who were able to make it last week as well, and to those who've listened to the recording on YouTube. I've had some feedback already from people who weren't able to make the live session and they've listened to it on YouTube. So thank you very much for going to my YouTube channel and listening to it. Really, really do appreciate it. There's nothing worse than writing a book and not knowing whether anybody's interested or whether anybody's read it. So I always love getting feedback about what I've written, even if it's to challenge the thinking in the book, or, you know, just to say that they enjoy the book or it's inspired them in some way to do something different. Any feedback, as far as I'm concerned, is great because it means that people are actually reading what you're putting down. Which is always fantastic. So welcome to you all, whether you're at home, work, listening on a mobile or a laptop. Good morning, good afternoon, and it's sort of good evening in Melbourne, so we're almost in the evening there. So welcome to the Coaching Self-Organising Teams book launch series. And last week I identified that I want to keep this going over the next few months and pick out a topic every week or every other week in the new year, and sort of go into a bit more detail and maybe get a bit of a conversation going on around the topic in these sessions. So I've said it's about an hour, but you know, it depends on how long you want to be here for, how long you would chat, what comments you've got, how much input you want to have. So the maximum will be is for an hour, but if it's shorter than that, fantastic. That means you get a bit of time back. So hopefully everybody's okay with that. So today I'm going to be diving into a topic that's highly, highly relevant for teams, which is about how we think. So this was one of the topics that I mentioned last week. And for those of you who maybe have never heard of me before listening into the video, just let me introduce myself. I've written a number of books on the topic of coaching and talent management, 2 of them with my co-author Gillian Jones, who actually works and lives in the UK. I specialise in organisational change and team and group coaching. So they're my specialities. I've done other things as well, but that's really what I specialise in and what my key interests are. So they're the books that I've written. If you're interested in looking at other books, as I said last week, Coaching Self-Organising Teams is really the daughter of group coaching, which I wrote back in 2012. And that was really me sort of putting down all my thoughts about working with groups and coaching them in the previous years and what I'd sort of gleaned and some of the tools and techniques that I picked up. Whereas Coaching Self-Organising Teams is really about understanding how you can democratize teams and workers in an organization, if that's something the organization wants to do. And obviously it's not for every organization, and I do talk about that in the book as well. The other books, How to Create a Coaching Culture, 50 Top Tools for Coaching, and Are They on the Right Bus, the 55-minute guide to talent management, they're really about sort of how you can then create that coaching skill set within organizations, and how you bring about change in organizations using coaching as a skill set to do that. So that's for those of you who've maybe never heard of me before. Hopefully that gave you a bit of an intro as to who I am and what I'm about. So let's have a look at the key questions that I flagged up last week. And one, why do we do team coaching? What is it about? And essentially teams are about making decisions and getting stuff done together. That's what essentially teams do. And so team coaching actually helps them do that, particularly where the team might be in a startup mode, or maybe they've hit a bit of a brick wall and needs a bit of spicing up, and that's a technical term, or maybe where they want to understand how what the team does impacts and is impacted by the system in which they're working. So that might be stakeholders, it might be customers who are also stakeholders, but looking at the different players within the system. So team coaching can help with that, all with that outcome of making decisions and getting stuff done. So last week I did a bit of a sort of, let's get an annotation going on the screen, draw where, which question are you drawn to the most? And what we saw was that we got a skew on the right-hand side of the screen. So how do we cope with our human emotions, all the way around to how do we work through conflict. So those were the questions that struck the most chord. And the two bottom ones, how we get a better understanding of thinking and how we develop resilience, probably I think got the most votes off the top of my head. So it was good that I'd chosen groupthink as one of the topics, because it's obviously of interest to people last week. So let's have a quick reminder of what's actually in the book for those of you who may be first time on the call, so welcome. And for those who may be first time listening to the video as well. So the book addresses the questions in different chapters within the book and in different ways. And so as a quick recap, these are the chapters within the book. The last chapter actually addresses the question, when should you stop coaching the team? So it's about knowing as a coach when to actually quit, and also helping the team know when they're ready to go it alone. So one of the prime directives that I talk about in the book is that we're actually there to help the team become self-coaching. So the job of the coach is to actually do themselves out of a job. If you're working with a team over a very long period of time, it suggests that the team has probably become dependent on you. And you probably become dependent on them. There's probably some sort of codependency going on there. And really what our aim is as a coach is to help the team coach each other so that they are better equipped and better able and understand how they make decisions together and how they work together to get stuff done. That's what it's all about. So knowing when to quit is perhaps one of the most key things that a team coach needs to understand. In fact, it's not just relevant to team coaching, it's also relevant to coaching one-on-one and group coaching as well. It's always being aware that your job is not to be the crutch for the team, it's to help the team do stuff for themselves. Okay, so let's have a look then what we're going to be talking about today. So this is one of the quotes that I have in the book, and it's somebody that I follow and have been following for a while, called 𝙃𝙤𝙧𝙀, who is on Twitter, and he also has written some amazing articles on Medium. And it's probably, this quote is probably the deepest insight to working with people in teams, groups, individually at home or at work. So it's all about, understanding that when we're working with people, it's about looking at the context and the circumstances. And if we think back in the world of organizational change and organizational development, and in fact, any of the sort of HR people side of organizational work, then a lot of the focus in the past few decades has been geared towards understanding individual personality. And we know now that many of the diagnostics that are used are not as reliable as we first thought. And I don't wish to be too controversial here, but some of the instruments that are in use, we know that the scientific rigor isn't necessarily there behind them. And we also use those tools in a way that might make us make assumptions about how people behave in teams, and which, as Kern points out, teams and individuals are shaped by the context and the circumstances. So many other factors are at play, including, the perceived status of the individuals within the team, how they're influenced on and influence others' behaviors within the team, how the environment actually affects what we do, and how our behavior is actually shaped by the system in which we live and work. So we are essentially social animals, and our social aspect of our lives has a massive impact on our behaviors. And that's why coaching teams isn't just about adapting one-on-one coaching techniques and then applying it to the team. It's really more nuanced than that. And you have to understand that when you're coaching a team, you are actually coaching a live system, which then interacts with another live system, and so forth and so on. And we do have that within one-on-one coaching as well, but I think in the team, it just becomes very much more apparent. And as a team coach, it can be very much more complex and difficult sometimes to navigate those different systems that are at play. So this chapter is the one that really inspired me to write the book. So, full disclosure, it's one of the first chapters that I wrote. I've got a keen passion in behavioral science. I'm not an expert by any means, but I am a very, very keen amateur, and I love the subject. And I think it's got huge benefit, not just in an organizational setting, but understanding how we are influenced in our social lives as well. So as a team coach, having those tools and techniques is only part of the story. And understanding that human behavior and being keenly observant about what's happening in the moment, moment to moment, and being able to hypothesize what intervention might help, if any intervention, and there might not be any intervention that you need to make. It might just be that you observe and then you help the team reflect. That for me is really rewarding and challenging in equal measure. So that's my sort of take on why this quotation is so deep and meaningful for me personally. I'm just interested to understand from your perspective, what does this quotation conjure up for you? And I'm happy to take either comments verbally, or if you want to put stuff in the chat box, please do. So what does that quotation conjure up for you? Yeah, it's very, very thought-provoking, very deep. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else want to proffer some thoughts on what that quotation means for them?
Hi, Ro. Yeah, I'm happy to comment. Sorry, I'm eating at the moment as well, so I'm not really good at typing.
No worries. I have that problem as well for different reasons.
I guess it's very true. I guess for me, it brings me back to my studies. I've way back, I did a master's degree in social and organizational psychology. So just doing that, you do see that we focus so much as people on what people do, definitely also in organizations, how people perform, for example, but miss the fact that performance is not just based in the person, but actually it is influenced by so many different elements of the context, that when you work in a team or work with definitely with self-organizing team, it becomes so important to unpack that context. And when you see, for example, somebody do something or perform in a way that is not acceptable to the group or not acceptable to the organization, it's always so important to not just blame that on the person or put that on the person, but actually start looking at what is the system and the process around this person and in the team and around the team that has prompted this behavior and this kind of performance, because in most cases it is not just a purely individual thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that environmental factor is also important, and enables you to help people make change easier. If you understand that by changing the environment, you can actually then change behaviors without even having to change mindsets or anything like that. So yeah, that absolutely spot on. And in fact, one of my early sort of entrees into the world of quality was reading Deming's writings and talks that he gave. And he was very, very adamant about the role that the system plays on performance, and you should stop actually measuring individual performance, because actually there's so much variation in the system that you're actually measuring the wrong thing. And yet we still measure individual performance without taking account of that systemic thing that might be going on that affects performance. So yeah, absolutely. And then Andrew, you're saying, sorry, I've missed somebody else's there. The same person might react differently based on the situation. Absolutely, absolutely. And that's all about perspectives. And when you're coaching a team, one of the things is to help the team share those perspectives so that they get a different viewpoint, a different worldview on what might be happening in the situation. And, working with one team, sometimes that can feel a bit uncomfortable. And then when you get to the end of the session and then you do those reflections, you realize that actually it was uncomfortable, but it maybe brought out something that you didn't realize. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute when we talk about groupthink. And then Andrew, you're saying about the interaction between the person and the team and the wider system is complex and fascinating. It is, absolutely. And that's why when you're coaching teams, it's a weird sensation. And I'm sure that some of you have already been coaching teams, but you get this sort of out of body experience almost, that you're in the room with the team, you're part of that experience that's going on with the team, and at the same time you're hovering above the team or at the side of the team or underneath the team, wherever your position is, watching what's going on, and you're watching your own interactions in the team as well. So you're kind of having all of those experiential things going on in the moment, and that's when you use your judgment in terms of, well, what do I do next? Do I do anything next? And when you then do that next thing, you then wait to see what happens as a result of the question that you might pose, or you might do something. You might write something on the board, you might write something on a flip chart, you might move position in the room. How does that then impact the way that the team then interacts with you and then with each other? Because often where we stand in the team or sit in the team affects the relationship that we have with the team as we're coaching it as well. So that's why team coaching, anything to do with groups, whether it's facilitation, coaching, presenting, whatever it might be, you're constantly taking in the data from what's happening in that room, in that moment in time. And it will be visual data, it will be experiential data that you can sense something is going on in the moment. So yeah, so just that one quote for me is just so rich in explaining the complexity and nuance of coaching people in teams. So let's have a look at bias, which is really the topic of the chapter around groupthink. So the key thing to remember about bias is that biases don't actually cause behavior. Biases are the phenomena, the things that you can observe actually happening. So it's almost like a post hoc explanation for what's happened. It doesn't describe the behavior per se, but you can see that those biases are at play. And we know that we all have those biases, by the way. We know that we use rule of thumb for decision making because we've got so much data to try and filter. It's the brain's natural way of making shortcuts, so we don't get bombarded and overwhelmed, so we can actually make decisions and we can do and take action. So biases and rules of thumb decision making are not necessarily bad of and in themselves. They are just ways of understanding behavior phenomena that we're seeing in groups and teams. So let's have a look in a bit more detail. Is everybody okay with that as a sort of start of a 10 on the biases? I'm happy to have a conversation if you want to talk about that more. Okay.
No, I'm okay.
Okay, I'll take, so anytime you go silent on me, I'll take that as a scent. And I now can't get the blooming slide to move over. Let me just, come on. Oh, I know why. The other thing when you are using your left hand, when you don't have the use of your right hand, is that you get the mouse the wrong way round, which is also interesting in terms of habits. So of course you've got those neural pathways that have created using a mouse, so you know that this click, but when of course you're using the other hand, it's the mirror image, and it's quite having this has been quite an interesting experience of what it's like to mess with the brain when you've got habits there. So the key biases that I look at in the chapter, and these are not, there's over 200 odd biases that have been documented, and I'm sure there's probably more that will come out as more research is done. So that I'm not saying these are the only biases. These are just the ones that I picked up based on my experience of working with groups and teams. So the first one is groupthink, which we'll talk about today. And I've done it again, I do apologize. The second one is confirmation bias. The third is status quo bias. The fourth one is authority bias. And the final one is priming and anchoring. So the two that I'm going to talk about in detail today are groupthink and priming and anchoring, because I think they are two of the most common things that happen in teams and groups that I've spotted in terms of the biases and rules of thumb decision making that are at play. So groupthink, just take a couple of seconds to think about this and type in the chat box your definition of what groupthink is. What does it mean to you? Yeah. So yes, so that I think people agreeing to the first point of view, I think is a really good summary of what this is about. And I do actually describe it I give a more sort of technical definition in the book. I've tried not to be too academic in the book, but when you get into a subject, you can't but help get a bit too wordy. So I've said that it's the tendency that individuals in a group will sacrifice challenging decisions and voicing dissent for harmony and consensus. So we want everybody to get along. Everybody needs to get along. So we just need to agree and keep things moving. And that sort of not challenging decisions and not voicing dissent for the sake of the greater harmony is something that happens a lot in teams and a lot in relationships as well. So it's not just specific to teams, it's also relationships as well. Although if it's one-on-one, then it's obviously not groupthink, but when there's more than two people involved, then it's definitely groupthink. So I'm just thinking, what do you think of the implications this has for working with teams and teams themselves? What's been your experience? And you can either speak or you can type in the chat box. I'm very happy with either. And if you don't wish to speak or type in the chat box, that's also fine.
Hi, Ro. I guess my experience with that is that it really robs the team of the richness of the multitude of perspectives that is in the team, and therefore robs them of an opportunity to come to, I guess, innovation, the best possible solutions. Because if you just keep conforming to what you think is the majority view within the group, you don't really challenge the status quo in that sense, and just keep on going. And it is, I think, in self-organizing teams, it's the bringing together of those different perspectives and challenging each other and looking for different ways of working that actually make them so powerful and so successful. So groupthink really robs the team of them being able to, I guess, tap into the wide wisdom that is present in the group. And that is, I think, with self-organizing, one of their main benefits, as opposed to a managed team where you have just one manager that and their view is the dominant one, and they make the decisions. Yeah, you almost get the same thing because you don't tap into that wider view.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point to make about self-organizing teams, that if they do have this sort of tendency to groupthink, the word you use there, Rob, it robs them. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. It's almost, and I think some of this probably comes from that fear of conflict, and then how do we deal with the conflict? Certainly in my experience of working with teams, that's where this tends to lie. Everybody wants everybody to get on. And that usually is an indication, if that's that kind of sort of feeling that you get, it's usually an indication that something's not quite right anyway. If everybody is really forcing things to harmony, it suggests that they don't have that ability, as you say, to have those divergent views and have fresh thinking in the group, which obviously then means that the group can be in a much better position to make decisions that will be of greater benefit. Because of course, if you're constantly wanting everybody to go with one view and not discuss it, you might end up making completely the wrong decision, and that could then take you in the very wrong direction. And I know with some of the teams that you work with, Yumi, that potentially could have sort of quite harmful ramifications as well. Because we see that there are a lot of examples in the literature around, in hospital settings where particularly you get everybody sort of converging on a viewpoint that isn't necessarily the right viewpoint, and then that has significant implications for the patient. And obviously Amy Edmondson and I talk about this in the book as well, psychological safety. You need to have that psychological safety to be able to challenge and have differing views in order that you do have all of the relevant information in front of you before you make a decision. So to bring back to team coaching, our role as a team coach is to help the group spot and get them to reflect on what might be happening in the moment. So, when we spot this, or we think that this might be happening, we just ask the team, what do you think is happening here? What are you spotting? What are you noticing? And then get them to see if they can spot what's going on in the group. And you might also then do that education role around biases and heuristics, and talk to them about, what groupthink is, and, when that might occur, and, when have they noticed that this might have happened in their particular team. So that's one of the important ones, I think, for exactly the very eloquent way that you said that, Yumi, that it robs the team of that resource and that innovation. So the second one I'd like to talk about then is anchoring. So this one is really a rule of thumb, because it's a way that you make decisions, using sort of a rough guide. And it's how we weigh up information to make decisions. And it's based on relative information. So we anchor it in something that's a known quantity or a known piece of information. And then we make a decision based on that baseline, which can then also lead to the bias of decision-making on pre-existing knowledge. So it's kind of a rule of thumb and bias all linked in together. So let's just do this very, very quick example of this. So you can choose any amount you'd like to donate to charity. These are the suggested amounts: $100, $200, and $300. And I'm sure that you've all seen these kind of things on websites for charities. This is a classic anchoring technique in websites and sales approaches. So you've got, you can make any donation you like to charity. So just type in the chat box how much you would choose to make. And I'm not going to hold you to this. This is just for this exercise. It's a hypothetical. Brilliant. So we've got some really, really interesting answers there. So we've got a range between 100 and 300. And then Andrew's saying that folks are inclined towards 200, which is also possibly true. I mean, you need to test it. And a lot of these websites do test, which one people are more likely to go to. And once you're aware of this, you'll start spotting it in all sorts of websites. So the question was framed as, pick an amount you'd like to donate to charity. So in this example, I've anchored you around a range of 100 to 300. And obviously we've got some people who have chosen 100 and some people have chosen 300. Andrew says, potentially more people would go for 200. That's possible hypothesis. But the fact is that I've actually anchored you around that range. So you might have not wanted to donate as much as that. But because that's the range on offer, that's kind of where you're going to go. So this can also, the challenge with this one is obviously they're quite high amounts. So you might get people not choosing to donate at all, might also be an option because it's too high. But the thing is that I've anchored you around those amounts of money. So that's your reference point in terms of where you're going to donate. If I'd said you can choose any amount, these are suggested amounts, that might have delivered a different answer as well. Because I'm still anchoring you around those 2 points, but I'm now allowing you to make a different choice as well. But the thing is, we like to make easy decisions. So the brain doesn't like too much choice. So even if I'd said you can make any choice you want, you still probably would have chosen somewhere between those ranges. There's also a priming effect here as well, because I'm priming you as to the amounts that I want you to choose. And when we're working with teams, teams often get set budgets, don't they? And they might be set a budget of $200 to do something. So that would be an anchor, because you've set that amount, and also you're priming them that that amount is the amount that the organization is expecting. So when we're working with teams, that can also be quite challenging, because that also restricts the team's ability to come up with innovation and to think freely. But it does make it easier for the team, because obviously they don't have to think about something. But it also has the downside that it constrains their thinking, because you've already given a sort of an anchor that they're then working towards. So that's my take on how anchoring can actually inadvertently hamper teams. And it doesn't have to be an amount, it can be any piece of information or data. But it constrains their innovation, it constrains their thinking, and it gives them an easy choice, an easy way out. So that's my thoughts. What are your thoughts on how anchoring affects teams in organizations? And again, you can type in the chat box or you can share. Or not, as the case may be.
Yeah, I've just put nice examples there, Ro, particularly as we're not always noticing it until we become more aware of it. And I was thinking about things like, growth targets and headcounts and all sorts of things that are often unacknowledged, that inform the constraints with which the team are working within without their conscious awareness.
Yeah,
really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think in organizations as well, some of those things are given as facts, but they're not actually necessarily facts. Data isn't necessarily objective because it's formed by humans, and there's always some sort of agenda behind data. So yeah, it's helping the team understand when they might be being subjected to some sort of anchoring, and also understanding when you contract with the team and with the organization, what are the rules of engagement? What is the scope and the natural constraints that the team is going to work with? How much freedom does the team actually have? And when you're working with self-organizing teams, this is really important, because you need to understand what decisions are within the gift of the team to make and what decisions are outside of their scope of delegation. So these kind of things are very, as I say, very subtle. Once you're aware of them, you then can start to ask more deep and meaningful questions around what's really going on, and help the team understand how they then ask those questions as well. So when you're commissioned to coach the team, if you're coming in as an external coach, or if you're in internally as well, you need to understand that scoping and that sort of background and decision-making effect that will then obviously impact the way that the team works together, because it does actually have an impact on how innovative and how much decision making authority they actually have, and whether it's being primed and pre-framed for them. Okay, so I'm conscious of time, and I want to make sure that I don't take up too much of your time. As I say, this is a subject that I could have devoted a whole book to. It's not my area of expertise, which is why I didn't. But it's certainly something that if you are working as a team coach, I think you need to get at least a basic grounding in behavioral science to understand what things might be at play in the organization. And Deming was not described as an organizational psychologist. He wasn't, he wasn't a behavioral scientist, but he understood this really, really well when he talked about, don't set targets. That's what this was about, because a target becomes an anchor. So again, I would also recommend reading anything by Deming, because he knew a lot about the subject before it became even a thing. And obviously the greats around behavioral science like Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, Richard Thaler, Cass Sunstein, and the UK author Richard Chataway is also fantastic in terms of behavioral science. So definitely would recommend becoming more au fait with behavioral science if you want to coach teams. Okay, so this is my sort of summary of the chapter and what we're doing when we're helping the team as coaches. What we're trying to do is we're trying to help the team understand that in order to be more effective in the way that they work together, then they're going to have to make much more of a conscious effort to think rationally and behave rationally. It's not something that will come naturally. And so reflective practice within the team coaching sessions is really, really important. Getting the team to observe and become self-aware and spot and recognize what they might be doing is crucial. So that reflective practice that we bring into the coaching sessions as we go through the session and then at the end of the session is really important. Hopefully then the team will be able to spot where those limitations are in terms of their thinking and do things that then mitigate some of those phenomena that we know exist. So we can't stop them because they, that's how we are as human beings. That's what makes us who we are. However, there are things that we can do which then help that. So for example, if you go back to that anchoring example, I could have asked you all to share your answers with me privately in the chat box. So to send a direct message to me privately in the chat box. And that would have then reduced one of the biases, which is that groupthink bias. It would also reduce any bias that there might be around, if you're working with a team, any perceived status differences. So making the comments anonymous to one person so that nobody else can see it, and then sharing it once you've collected the information is a great way of reducing some of the effects of those biases that we know are at play. So one of the things that I do with teams when, you have a list of things that you want, the team wants to do, and you say, okay, well, let's prioritize, let's vote on all of these. A very simple example, but let's vote on all of these. Instead of people doing the dot vote where they put a little dot on the board or they vote on Zoom using a little annotation, you actually get them to tell you as the coach what they're voting for, and then you share the votes afterwards when everybody's voted. So it's kind of like a democratic voting system that you use with teams to stop them from being influenced by other people within the teams. So there are just simple things that you can do that help make it easier for the team and then help them understand why you're doing that. So Charlotte and I use this approach all the time, and we always do a debrief with the team to explain to them why we've done that so that they can then understand what the reasoning is behind it, and then they can use it in future meetings. The other thing I would say is that help the team stay curious. So what's really going on here? Is it that we are making rational decisions? Are we really thinking about this from all perspectives? Or are we actually being influenced by things that we're not consciously aware of? So help the team stay curious and just question what's really going on in the moment. And then the other thing which I cover in the book, which I haven't covered today, but I just want to make mention of this, is to look for evidence. So in the book, I actually talk about what evidence actually means. And what research, how you do research as well. So that's in the book for you if you want to get a copy of the book. So all of these things are really, really important, and they take time, which is probably why people don't spend much time on them, because they want to get into that action bias, which is another bias that we know is at play. So before we call an end to today's session, I'd just like to hear from you what you've taken away from today in terms of what's been of value from the conversation, which will then help me with the next one in the series, which I'm doing next week on coaching tools and techniques. So just share with me what's been of value, what you're going to take away from today's session. And again, you can either do it in the chat box or you can tell me verbally.
I I'll do both. I've put a comment in the chat and letting you know that I've just ordered the book and loved the session in many ways. Really, really great start to my day.
Thank you.
Really thought-provoking, really interesting, and yeah, just love that kind of depth. And you clearly speak from experience in these areas, around those areas which all of us are encountering, but it gives a way of making sense of some of the frameworks and the approach. I was with a team just yesterday, and much of what you say was just completely ringing true in terms of, that's exactly how my lived experience of being in body now. A lot of it just resonated, but it gave a framework and a cogent, obviously deeply experienced approach of making sense of those things in a way that was really helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Andrew. And I'm glad that that's given you a good start to the day. And thank you for sharing that verbally. So we've got some points in the chat box. So coaching to the group is different. Yeah, absolutely. Team think and anchoring are very valid. Yeah, we miss noticing most of the time. Yes. No worries for not speaking, Sita, that's fine. I hope your throat gets better soon, and I hope it's nothing to do with COVID, please. Share the learning around biases with self-organizing teams. Yeah, absolutely. And I try to do my very best to post on this regularly. Oh, thank goodness, Sita, it's not COVID, good. And Richard, I stalked Richard online, and he's actually done a talk for the Australasian Change Days as a result of me stalking him, with his colleague Matt Flurry on behavioural science as well. So yeah, definitely. Again, if you want to buy another book, I would definitely recommend his book, The Behaviour Business, which is fantastic. And thank you very much, Andrew, for buying the book as well. So next week, as I say, I will be talking about tools and techniques. If there's anything that you want me to cover specifically, that you've got questions about, then please do let me know. You have my email address. For anybody listening on the video recording, again, please drop a chat in the YouTube comments at the bottom if there are any questions that you've got for next week. I realise, of course, that it is very, very close to Christmas. So I'm hoping that I make it at least a bit of a gift for Christmas in terms of tools. I know people are always interested in coaching tools, so I may well share a couple of the tools as a sort of a Christmas gift to you before we start 2022. And then next year, I will be doing fortnightly calls again on a Thursday. So I'm using that, what we know about behavioural science, make it easy. So the nudges, it will be at 3 o'clock Thursdays every other week in January, February, March. Hoping that no other client commitments come in on those particular days. I will try and work around it so I can do that. If not, then I will record something and get those sent out at 3 p.m. every other Thursday next year. So any questions, do let me know. In the meantime, buy the book, thank you very much. Please do contact me and join the call next Thursday. And finally, just if you've got any thoughts you want to share on social media, please use the hashtag #CSOTFlourish, which stands for Coaching Self-Organising Teams Flourish. And thank you so much for joining in the call today. I've really, really enjoyed listening to your comments and thoughts and sharing with you, and really appreciate you showing up today, wherever you are in the world. Stay safe, have a fantastic week, and hopefully I might see you next week, but no worries if not, it will be recorded anyway, so you'll get to see it on the YouTube channel. And let me know if you've got any questions. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you, Ro.